learners. I am Dr. Lata Rani, an Associate Professor and Program Anchor of Banking, Financial Service and Insurance Department at Delhi Skill and Entrepreneurship University. Today, I am going to cover the last aspect of free consent, that is mistake. When we are going to start this session, through this session, I would take you to the detail of mistake. You will be able to understand and distinguish different types of mistake that you look in a contract agreement. The learning outcomes of today's session is understanding how mistake is going to create an impact on the free consent. Number 2, how that mistake is creating an effect on the contract. Number 3, different types of mistake through which parties are affected. So let us start one by one. Let me explain what mistake is. Mistake is described as an element which, when occurs in a contract, makes it void. So the contract is nullified from the beginning. Mistake can have so many impacts and it causes a lot of issue. The issue may be mutual or individual and it is of different types. So it is when we are not very sure as to which individual or party is affected by the mistake. First mistake is mistake of effect. When there is a bilateral mistake causing a contract void, it is subjected to a mistake of fact and not to mistake of law. So when there is a misunderstanding between the parties where facts have been omitted which leads to the mistake, this kind of mistake is known as mistake of effect. So bilateral is when both parties are at mistake. So very important, where both parties who are entering into a contract and they are entering with a wrong information, with the omission of information, and that leads to mistake, then this is mistake of effect and not a mistake of a law. Now there are two types of mistake which happens in a contract. One, unilateral mistake. Unilateral mistake is a mistake where one party is at mistaken. So where one party is doing or omitting certain facts of the case or the contract or purporting to the agreement, it is a unilateral mistake. Second is bilateral mistake. Bilateral mistake is when both parties are at a mistaken. So parties who are entering into a contract, if two or more than two parties are entering into a contract, all parties to the contract are at mistake. So bilateral is where all the parties are at mistaken edge, whereas unilateral is where one of the party is at mistaken edge. Bilateral is further divided into subparts. Number 1, mutual mistake. A mistake is said to be mutual when both parties misunderstood each other. So thus it shows there is a breach in the principle of consensus ad idem. Consensus ad idem states that both are not in a same state, same consensus, same level, and the contract is said to be void in this case. Let us understand this point from the example. A has made an offer to B to sell his scooter. A intended to sell his 3G scooter, but B believed that A would sell his 4G scooter. So there was no proper communication as to which scooter they are selling, and the fact was mistaken. So this is mutual mistake. A offered to sell the scooter. Which scooter? He is not sure of, right? So B believed it was 4G, A believed it was 3G. So both are not at the same level. So this kind of mistake is mutual mistake. And mutual mistake, the effect of mutual mistake is contract is void from the beginning. Second set of mistake under bilateral is common mistake. Common mistake is defined under section 20 of Indian Contract Act 1872. It lays down the provision of some common mistakes. A contract arising out of common mistake is considered to be void. This type of mistake is possessed by both the parties, but this mistake is not the result of mutual mistake. It arises individually. So if somebody say that I am going to sign a contract and I will be making you payment online. So contract has been created where platform related to online has not been described. Is it online by debit card, credit card, these days payment banks, Paytm, UPI. So this was a common mistake which was derived from the bilateral mistake. Bilateral mistake as to the subject matter. Yes, subject matter is the main existence of the contract for which contract has been created. So when we talk of subject matter, it is basic purpose of creating a contract. So subject matter is very important for signing the contract. Now bilateral mistake is classified in three parts. Number one, existence of a subject matter. When both parties have made an agreement on a subject matter which does not exist, right? So that contract would be considered void. So for example, if somebody says that there is an hospital in that particular region and I am going to create a contract with you for a year. So insurance policy is sold on the name that this is the hospital at that very place, and you, whenever you will go to that hospital, your treatment will be free of cost. So you have taken up that contract, taken up that policy. Later on you came to know there is no hospital at that place. So subject matter is missing for which the contract has been created. So these kinds of contract is void. Second is quality of the subject matter. When we talk of quality of the subject matter, when both the parties have made an agreement on a subject matter and later on it is found that quality is differing from the one which was mentioned. So this is a case of bilateral mistake. Again, the effect of bilateral mistake is contract would be void. So if you are entering into a contract with a rice vendor and you believed the rice quality is top, whereas party is not possessing those rice which with a quality, with a high quality. So they are giving you moderate quality. Both are at mistake when they have created an agreement, they have not mentioned the quality level. So quality is differing from the one which was mentioned. Third is identity of the subject matter. When both the parties have made an agreement on the identity of the subject matter, then it differs, then the contract is again a void. So it means if you are thinking that this bat is sold by Dhoni, who is brand ambassador of a brand, then you are at mistake, and the party who is selling you that bat just by inducing, yes, it is sold by Dhoni, Just because you have seen the advertisement, you believed that it is a Dhoni bat, it is sold by Dhoni. This is how identity of the subject matter is destroyed. In all these cases, it is a bilateral mistake. And when there is a bilateral mistake, the effect of bilateral mistake is it is void. We have to see mistake as to possibility of performing the contract. So when we talk of how to go with the contract in terms of performance when there is a mistake done. So when we have to talk about the possibility, it is divided into two parts. First possibility comes under physical impossibility. Second possibility comes under legal impossibility. Physical impossibility is when an agreement is made and it is found that the subject matter is not available anymore, then it becomes impossible for the parties to execute a part of the obligation. So it means that contract cannot be performed because of physical impossibility. So such kind of contract is falling under void category, that is nullified, cancelled, it has no impact. Let's take an example that A has made an agreement with B to sell the goods and agreement was done. A was not aware of the fact that the goods are already perished due to some reason. So when goods are not there, what the obligation they will perform? In this case, contract would be void because the basis on which contract was made does not exist anymore. So it's just like you have created a contract with the party and that is not possible to perform now. So physical impossibility is either the subject matter is destroyed or the party who is able to perform it is now unable to perform the same. So physical impossibility is when the parties are not able to perform the obligations written in the contract as per the deed. Second is legal impossibility. This is basically the impossibility when an agreement is done between two countries, but now it is seen war arises between the countries. So now the contract between those countries, those two businessmen across those countries becomes illegal, legally impossible to be carried out. Just like the contract, if they have entered, if any Rus party has entered into a contract with Ukraine party and now still war is going on, those both parties will not be able to impose those obligations on each other. Let's take an example. There is Mr. A of one country enters into a contract with B of another country to export petroleum with an agreement of 20 years. So this contract is done for 20 years, but after 10 years it was seen now the relationships are not cordial, the governments are not supporting to each other and there is a war situation. So all the internal exports were stopped by the country. In this case, A is legally bound to end the contract. So that contract is unable to be performed. Obligations will be remaining unfulfilled under the legal impossibility. But both parties cannot have challenging rights towards each other. They cannot sue to each other, yes, the contract was for 20 years, they had to send the petroleum products to my country no matter if there is a war situation. So that cannot be claimed by any of the party. So these contracts are becoming impossible because of the legal environment, legal intervention. Mistake of law. Like we have discussed mistake of fact. Mistake of fact means where the factual information, that means the information which is omitted pertaining to the contract, is done, is used, whereas mistake of law is second thing. Mistake of law means people should have minimum knowledge about the law. It is like caveat emptor. You must have heard this term, caveat emptor. This is the term where they are going to say, let the buyer be aware. So when we talk of Sales of Goods Act, there is one important term, that is buyer be aware, caveat emptor. And when buyer is not using the judicious information, then those are known as mistake of law. So ideally, law believes they should be aware of the fact that which act they should restrain from doing, which they are supposed to be done. So if you say that I am not an educated person, I don't have legal knowledge, that will not be a remedy provided or excused under the mistake of law. Law will believe you should know the basic fundamental rights, basic fundamental duties, as well as basic penalties which you are doing it. If somebody is using robbery, in a particular shop, in that case you say that I don't know what are the robbery provisions and I should not be penalized. Law says no, even if you are not educated, you are supposed to have minimum knowledge about the constitution, about the legal aspect. Let's take a look at one of the case study. In the case study of Ramchandra versus Ganesh Chandra, it was seen that the complainant entered into the agreement of lease of coal mining with the respondent. So one party is under the leasing contract. So coal mining products are given by the complainant to the respondent. As per the agreement, complainant made the payment in advance to the respondent. But the Privy Council and the decision of Calcutta High Court questioned the understanding of law between the parties. Thus, the complainant refused to continue the contract and sued the respondent for the refund. So, that is where you cannot say that I am not aware of the legal provisions. Taking precedent of Copper versus Phoebus, it was held that the complainant would be entitled with the refund paid by him. So that is how mistake of law is applicable to this case study. So what I wanted to showcase through this mistake, that there are different types of mistake. One, mistake of effect, another mistake of a law. Same way, unilateral mistake or bilateral mistake. So one must be clear when they are at the mistake, contract is said to be void under the unilateral as well as bilateral mistake. So when we talk of mistake of a law and mistake of effect, we must know that mistake of effect is basically when we are omitting certain factual information from entering into the contract. So parties are entering into the contract, but they are omitting the facts. Those facts are important, those facts are pivotal, and they are key elements to enter into the contract. Same way we have mistake of law. So mistake of law is basically when a person is saying he or she is not aware of the legal provisions and they do the mistake. In that case, law believes you should have minimum knowledge about the law. So when I was giving example of Sales of Goods Act, yes, it is expected that buyer must be self-aware before making the purchase decision. So caveat emptor is basic legal provision under the law. So if buyer says that I was not very sure about the product, I don't know how to check the quality standards as per ISO, I don't know how to go with the pricing decision, these things will not be entertained by the judge in the court. Mistake of law is when they are supposed to have minimum knowledge about the law. So like I was giving example of a caveat emptor, yes, they should refrain from doing those actions which are not supposed to be done, right? So when it is like buyer who is saying that yes, I have to check out the quality. So your decision must be informed decision. Purchase decision cannot be taken in a mess manner, in a hurried manner, or in a manner which is not suggested by the law. Informed decisions are always better for purchasing a particular good or availing a particular service. So if you are going for a shopping, you are the ones who are supposed to see the quality of a product, number one, the price of the product, number two, and most important, the competition of that product, number three. So you have to be very sure that yes, it is all done to collect the sufficient information. So mistake is generally enlisted in such a manner where we are supposed to cover the legal framework, that is mistake of law, and factual framework, that is mistake of fact. So we must be duly ensuring that the consent is availed under a consideration of a concessus ad idem. It has to be free, but in all those scenarios where the consent is obtained by coercion, undue influence, misrepresentation, mistake, and fraud, in all these 5 scenarios, consent is said to be non-free. It is said the consent has been obtained through the illegal mechanisms that is induced by all these 5 factors and parameters. So when we talk of free consent, it is concessus and idem must be established. So relationship of the parties must be establishing the concessus part, concessus and idem. That means they must think in the same manner, at the same time, with the same intention of creating the contract and performing the obligations. So I would like to throw a light on major case laws, where first case is of Bolton versus Jones. In this case, the plaintiff has taken over the business of Brockhurst. The defendant used to deal with the Brockhurst and, not knowing of the purchase, sent the order of certain goods to him. The order was properly completed, but when the defendant came to know about this purchase, he tried to avoid the contract and did not pay the fee. In this case, defendant was held liable as there was mistake about the identity which forms the core of the agreement. So we need to understand that how it is going to affect when it is a mistake about the identity. Second case is related to Phillips versus Brooks Limited. In this case, a person entered into the plaintiff's shop and selected some pearls and rings. While purchasing that, he misleads the plaintiff by saying, "Sir, George Bullough has listening to this plaintiff and pledges his rings and pearls." Plaintiff, after finding the purchase, misled him by telling the wrong identity words just to avoid the contract. But the court held that agreement cannot be held void. It is voidable at the option of the consent obtained through the fraud. So fraud and mistake has to be distinguished. When you are selling those pearls by taking a huge name of the brand ambassador George Bullough, then this is not a mistake, it is a case of a fraud. So when we are trying to establish, we must know the conclusion part. It can easily be concluded that if any agreement by which consent is affected by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, it is voidable at the option of the party whose consent was so caused. If the party whose consent was obtained by using any of these elements accepts the agreement, then agreement becomes enforceable. And if he rejects the agreement, then the contract becomes declinable, resignable. While in case of a mistake of the parties, party can only avoid the contract when there is a bilateral mistake of the party regarding some important facts of the agreement, or parties are under a mistake of any foreign law. So we have to ensure and establish that contract is voidable when the consent is obtained by coercion, undue influence, fraud and misrepresentation, whereas in case of a mistake, it is a void. So with this, I would like to conclude my session that if at any point of time these 5 elements are present in the contract, then those contracts are voidable at the option of aggrieved party in few cases and void in some cases. Just like we have covered and concluded that because of mistake, either it is unilateral or bilateral, whether it is mistake of fact or mistake of law, it will be counted as contract of void nature. Thank you, learners. Keep learning, keep enjoying and keep reading. Thanks.